This morning we are going to go and meet with a pastor. He's probably the most famous pastor in all of China, and he's at the very center of the underground house church. Just a really quick Google search on his name. He is one of the most famous activists of Chinese house churches. It says he was sentenced in 1976 to 7 years in prison for aiding the counter-revolution. While he was in prison, he had a stroke, and he has a serious case of diabetes. He's in his 70s now. This is a pastor who can probably say that he has more people in his church than most countries have people. We have one guy that's supposed to be coming and picking us up this morning to take us to meet with Zhang. Zhang is still followed by his patrol officers, so we're going to be meeting with him today, even though it's not that safe. 现在都很好，我们等你啊。好，都准备好了是吧？好，谢谢啊。So this is the guy that's supposed to be coming and picking us up. He has a relationship with Zhang, and so he's able to, take us and meet with him. I think this is going to be a great day, a pretty exciting day to go and meet with him.
My name is Eugene Bach, and I host the Back to Jerusalem podcast. I live out of my backpack, and my office, it's an economy airplane seat. Why do I travel around the world? Well, you could say I have a sort of disease, but I can't sit still when I live in the space between all the bad news and the good news. I may be just another random guy with a podcast, but what I am seeing in history and around the world today tells me that our God is not just another God, and I'm not saved just to be a part of another church program. I believe God has given us a mission, but often we can't fit it into our schedule or find a place left on our to-do list. Many of us are left standing in the space between the Great Commission and the not-so-great reality of the church in the world today. Now, I have a hunch that we already know the answers, but why does much of the church seem stale? Why are so many prayers powerless? Who wants a bigger vision? Who wants a taste of God's amazing promises? When the rubber hits the road, I have a hunch that revival is what I need. And likely, I'm not the only one.
The two things that China has no shortage of are people and history. The Chinese are one of the few cultures on earth that can trace their lineage all the way back to the time of Noah's children.
As we're going into the Temple of Heaven, somebody has taken water from a brush and just written a bunch of characters. Characters are so important for the Chinese culture. It's not just a language of communication by visual of reading. It's also a communication of art and feeling. And there's a lot of history. In Chinese, for instance, one of the things that I think is really amazing is that the Chinese make a character that looks like this right here, which means people. And to show that everything that is great, they will use this character right here. And this represents great, big, all that is grand. And then the word for God, when people talk about God, they often say tian, or like sky. So there's different words for God. Shen, there is zhu, there's also tian. And the word for God in tian is that which is greater than everything that is big. It is the greatest of all. God is bigger than everything that is grand on this earth.
They have over 50,000 of these characters in their language. And in some of the Chinese characters, we can actually see the stories of Genesis written right in them. Spiritually, this is one of the most important places in all of China. It points back to more than 4,000 years, long before Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, or communism.
There are so many things that are really significant about doing the sacrifices that the people did here during those days, because they look just like the sacrifices that they did.
It's so hard to be inconspicuous in China when, number one, you're a foreigner. Number two, you're meeting with the most notorious ex-convict house church pastor. And three, you try to film it all in public. We tried to pretend like we were just tourists visiting a historical spot and asked Pastor Zhang to give us an introduction to the background.
这是中国的天坛，那个天就是中国的上帝，就是中国的神。在这个地方，是过去的君王都到这里祷告，都在这里来敬拜。尤其到这里来看，这都跟圣经记载的很一样。所以中国人是一个敬拜上帝的国家。
This is the largest altar for sacrifice in the world. It was dedicated to Shangdi, which sounds exactly like the Hebrew word for Shaddai. The similarities to the Old Testament worship are undeniable. Unlike every other temple in all of Asia, this temple was made according to the second commandment God gave to Moses, to make no graven image, only a name.
现在我们也提醒我们很多的华人，中国是一个敬拜上帝的国家。中国在过去几千年来都是上帝的文化，所以上帝在这块土地上应该掌权。
Zhang is a natural-born preacher, and before he breaks out into a sermon, we thought it would be better to find somewhere a little more private. Even though it feels like we're alone, Pastor Zhang is continually looking over his shoulder, making sure no one else is listening.
过去人们饿肚子，经邓小平改革了之后，人们的生活问题解决了，之后人们比较自由了，人们才回想到人是从哪里来，往何处去。所以人的心预备好了。感谢主，那个时间1980年元月，我从监狱里被放出来，放出来了之后，就在我们方城这块土地上建立了一个福音的团队。
那个时间可以给我们介绍那个。
开始我们没有心思建立，也不懂得建立，不只是追我一个人，要追很多人，这很多人都没有家了，都没有家，都要离开家。那我们这些人都来到一块儿，一块儿拆派呀，一块儿打发呀，一块儿吃啊，一块儿住啊，一块儿学习呀，一块儿祷告啊，一块儿敬拜呀，一块儿哭泣呀，一块儿流泪呀，一块儿兴奋，是在这样的光景啊，谁知道？这就是一个团队的雏形开始。公安局审判我的时刻说：“你怎么建立一个团队？”我的团队是你们公安帮我建立的。你胡说，我们怎么能帮你建立团队？我说是的，啥时间你们抓的运动紧，我们团队发展的就快；啥时间你们不抓了，我们团队就增长得慢。我说这样一切都是你们帮我们建立起来，神的恩典，真的有神的作为。到1994年才有外边的弟兄们到中间讲，你们要开始团队服侍。我说什么叫团队服侍？他说很多人在一块儿被拆派打发。我说我们就是。他说你们就是谁教导的？我说没有人教导。他说没人教导，为什么？怎么想起来开始这个？我没有想起来。我说神的手带领我们这样做的。1886年方城才有第一个人信主，1980才95年，在这个地方不但有了很多的教会，有了很多的信徒，在这个地方有个大型的福音团队在中国兴起了，所以直到现在，我们这个团队的名称叫华人归主，就希望全世界的华人都来归向神。但是有时候这个名字太小了，因为不只是华人，神要的是万族。那是的，有一天也或许我们还得继续的改良，继续的往前走，还需要影响更多的人。
Pastor Zhang is truly a living legend. To me, he's like the father of the Chinese underground house church, and he was there from the very beginning
of revival.
我们去运圣经的一大堆人，
你每一次大概多少本？
每次都是背150公斤。
啊，55公斤。
这个是云嘛？这个机会的时候，
我觉得扶持主，我苦也好，累也好，我甜也好，苦也好，我都觉得是美好的。我愿意跟随耶稣的脚走。
One of the unique characteristics of the revival inside of China is that the majority of ministers are women, like Sister Han.
他喜欢做工，有护照，有飞行礼，有护照礼。
非常有信心啊！加入在东北要兴起大的布道的，我说在那里是要兴起，是我们如同南海一样，哈利路亚！
他经常到哪里去，就是带一群姐妹们召开分享大会。谁如果软弱有病了，同心合意几个人就跪下祷告，10个礼拜的每个屋子都坐不下了。那现在发愁怎么办？我们现在要祷告上帝。我说将来神一定在这里就是要开福音的大门，要开大广场啊！将来，哈利路亚！来。但是我们信心不够，所以以后我们也要把祷告的面扩大一点。因为他的感染力，就觉得充满了希望，就觉得爱主太值了，为主受苦太值了，跟随主太值了。整个的村庄看见基督徒的家子这么好啊，都来信吧！哎呀，在当时成个福音爆炸性的了。得救的人数特别，他出来那段时间，不但青年人兴起来，得救的人数天天加增。冬天一受洗了，就来一个奉主的名受洗了，第2个都排好了，在这儿站着，就这样一整夜。神迹就不用说了，到处都有。神迹奇事，病得医治。上帝都归到你的面前，你说没有一个不是你的影响，都带到你面前。
我一去了之后，神的能力就抓住了他，就刷着肩跪在地上认罪祷告。哈利路亚！
公安局就继续追我们，抓我们。
有2个乡的教会就带到非常复兴，不单单是复兴，就培训每个乡的培训同工会，有时候办些大布道会，有时唱歌会、祷告会都建立起来了，天天几乎就是很忙。
Women are continually being used by God to fuel this revival. Special women like Xiaomin.
小民就是出生在我们这个教会里边。当时就觉得唱就是觉得我们团队唱就行了，没有想到今天会漂洋过海，走向全世界的华人，没有这样想过。
Xiaomin is the voice of the house church. The Chinese don't sing Western hymns or translated praise songs. They sing their own songs, born from persecution and trial. This whole entire songbook is made of songs that the Holy Spirit gave to a Chinese peasant girl. Pastor Zhang said that his hometown is like Nazareth, and what good could ever come out of Nazareth? But this seemingly insignificant rural farming community was the epicenter for revival. And if you walk up to any house in the countryside here, you'll see red on all of the doorposts like the Jews at Passover, and crosses are on every home. And just down the road from Fangchang, another network was born, China Gospel Fellowship. Even though it was born in the same countryside, they brought revival into the cities.
哈利路亚，哈利路亚！我们将颂赞、荣耀、权柄归给三位一体的上帝。
But what's it like to lead a fellowship of 10 million believers? Pastor Shen started this church when he was just a teenager.
我认为啊，我的人生的路啊，都是一个字苦。小的时间是饿的苦，等到10几岁以后是病疾的苦， 等到我出来传道的时候，公安局抓我做严的苦，我认为都是苦。苦难不但使人信心坚定，也能看见神的同在、神的作为，经历神的大能。1978年到1998年这个20年，中国教会的复兴呢是以农村为主。那个时间人多，农村人多，人在哪里，教会就应该在哪里。不改变的话，中国教会的复兴已经成为历史，成为过去了。这个必须要为了世界宣教，为了教会的各方面的这个在城市中建立影响力，中国教会必须走这个道路。
Does that mean that the church?
So I asked, after years of revival, does the church in China risk growing stagnant?
这是一个危机啊，这是一个危机。几十年是苦难，是一个很大的一个试探，但是苦难没有把中国教会打倒，反而炼净了中国教会，鼓励了教会的发展。教会不可能怕苦难，但可能怕世俗化。
China is changing at incredible speeds. But the question is, will the church survive? Let's look at the first Christian missionaries that brought the gospel to China. They had an amazing influence in their day, traveling along the ancient Silk Road. This is the beginning of the Silk Road that gave China its first taste of the good news.
If you look at Shanghai, one of the more popular cities inside of China, they'll say that the history goes back several hundred years. Beijing, history goes back 1,000 years, but in this city, history goes back more than 3,000 years. This is the oldest city of China. We're in the basin of the Yellow River, and the Yellow River is the birth of the Chinese people. This is where Christianity got its foothold about 1,600 years ago. At the very top here, we can see a cross. It was a typical Eastern Orthodox cross. There's nothing special about it. It's kind of tucked away in the back of this park here in Xi'an. The missionaries that came here, they began to make relations already with the emperor, and that's what this text supposedly says. The oldest recording of Christianity in China. It's the history of the Iranian missionaries that came from the Persian Empire. They actually didn't call themselves Christians. In Chinese, they're referred to as the religion of the light. And so the Nestorian missionaries were actually really well known for doing cross-cultural ministry. They were also well known for speaking both Persian and Chinese language.
Finding a little bit of a challenge getting to this location. I mean, even the locals are having a hard time telling us how to get there. This place, you can find it on Google, but yet it feels like we're coming to a location that very few people in the world have ever been to. And I'm surprised that our taxi driver is willing to brave this road.
It might not look like a typical church building, but the original Nestorian missionaries from Iran made it in a style of the Chinese structures of the day.
This is the Daqing Temple. This has been argued to be the oldest church in all of China.
But the oldest remaining church in China was taken over by the Buddhists.
More than most Buddhist temples, this has a very strong feeling of its Hindu origins here. But one of the things that does identify this as being an early Christian church is this stone. They call it the Nestorian stele.
that is the one of the main pieces that makes the argument for this being the oldest church in China, representing the very first missionaries that came here. They were able to see churches all over China during their time here. However, they all disappeared. Once the Mongolians converted to Islam, that affected all of the areas that they were able to conquer, including right here in China. This is pretty stinking cool. So the traditional kind of Nestorian looking cross, and then just lined up behind it, up on the mountain, is the Daqing Temple. They had monasteries all over, as well as Bible schools, and the Christians became quite densely populated. That was before they died out towards the end of the Tang Dynasty. It's sad to see that what was once established here died out.
You know, it may be sad to see a good work come to an end, but God is always working despite our success or failures. And Christianity is not a Western religion. It is a westward religion.
And I'm coming to you live on delay from somewhere within the borders of China. Here we are listening to a pastor of the underground church in China on the front lines who's able to share information that is like gold. I know that he's been working in Western China. How are those projects going in Western China?
我们现在在西部做一些福音的工作，四川、新疆像这些地方已经有教会建立。他们也慢慢的在往少数民族在发展。西藏的那个寺庙里面的这些主持、这些大赖都接待他们到家里面去，然后像朋友一样，他们也可以给他们分享。现在就是可以给他们分享耶稣，也送圣经给他们。那现在我讲一个新疆的一对夫妻，比如说他们在祷告的时候，他们用什么样的办法又能够有工作，又能够更好的服侍他们家庭的离婚率比较高，所以这对夫妻呢，现在就慢慢的呢到他们的中间去，可以协调这些夫妻家庭关系，这个工作呢就是非常好。也又给他们解决工作的问题，又能够帮助到当地的这些维族的人，又能有机会给他们传福音。
I even have the ability to sleep in the middle of doing a podcast.
God bless you. Little Joe is working in Western China because his church also shares a vision that they call Back to Jerusalem. This takes us back to the beginning. This vision that God gave to his disciples in Acts chapter 1, he is now giving it to the Chinese. This is nothing new. You could say that it's the Great Commission with Kung Pao flavor. In the early 1900s, Chinese Christians received this vision to take the gospel to the nations in between China and Jerusalem. One of the earliest groups to receive this vision of Back to Jerusalem was called the Back to Jerusalem Traveling Band. And amazingly, I got to meet with one of the original missionaries.
人罪悔改以后有了生命，这以后再祷告的时候，就是光把心里的事情完全摆在主面前，一样。主只要我看着不对的地方，我就知道承认。神释放了我，哎呦，我主啊，感谢你！今天我才知道，主赦免我的罪，同时圣灵也感动我。说出方言来，我平常也没说，也不会。那天晚上，主叫我说方言，我心里特别高兴。主赦免我，让我得了个神的恩典。从那一天以后，主也就把这个要传福音的这个工作放在我里边，让我知道我是个蒙恩的人，我必须要传福音。所以呢，从16岁那年，我才完全奉献。说将来我长大了，无论到哪儿去做什么。我相信你带领我，我要为你传福音，高兴得很，平安喜乐。
Think about this. The Chinese have about 1.3 to 1.5 billion people. That means if 1 billion people up and left Earth and went to Mars, they would still have more people than any other country on earth except for India. With this many people experiencing the world's largest revival, imagine what they could do if they only send a small fraction of those people out into the mission field between China and Jerusalem.
每一个中国人都要接受耶稣。
回教国家，福音传到耶路撒冷去，这是神的心意。
中东这块土地是上帝留给中国人的礼物，
不单是神给中国教会的使命，也是神给世界教会的使命。
所以现在中国的家教会，我们正在训练、准备、预备，但是也有些先头部队已经达到了阿拉伯国家，已经到那儿宣教了。
宣教呢，是一个意向，应该去鼓励，应该去推动，应该是训练。相信在不远的将来，浩浩荡荡的宣教大运将从中国走出去。
华人的归主，一个就是阿拉伯世界的归主，这两点是我们中国教会不可推卸的责任，我们正在走。